In this episode, we speak with Stephen Sokoler, the founder and CEO of Journey, the leading proactive mental health solution for modern companies. In 2015, Stephen founded Journey with the mission to help all people live happier, healthier, less stressed lives. Rooted in live group learning, peer support, and proactive health, Journey provides the most engaging, cost-effective way to reduce turnover and tackle burnout. Before Journey, Stephen Sokoler was the co-founder and CEO of Altrum Honors, the largest financial deal toy company in the world. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
There's going to be a lot to discuss. You have a really interesting career track. First off, let's talk about Journey. Why are we all so stressed out?
Life is hard. It's hard being a human being. It's hard living in 2024, going into 2025, like the world, whether it's social media or politics or just life, family, the human condition. We haven't really evolved to live in the world that we're living in now. And so life is hard. And it's probably always been hard, right? I'm sure back in the savannah, having to hunt and survive was probably hard in its own ways too. But the way our brain evolved was much more for that than the world we're living in now. We need a lot more support and care than most of us are probably getting.
Yeah, I recently took a trip with my family, and as you tend to do, you talk a lot on the trip. It's an interesting time to learn more things about kids potentially. And one thing was interesting that my daughter brought up is that it's become commonplace for her friends to have therapists. When I was a kid, wasn't the norm. Now it seems like it's the norm. Is it just that people need someone to talk to and they're not getting that outlet or companionship through their regular interactions?
I think that's probably part of it. I think that's an interesting trend. I'm curious, how old is your daughter?
15.
If you had said she was 4, then I'd be concerned. But I think 15, yeah, I mean, look, when I started doing therapy, the way I described it to friends, and this sounds so ridiculous, is like, it's really therapeutic in the sense that like, it just feels good, right? It just feels good to like be heard. And the other thing that I would share is the thing that most often my therapist would say, which was like the most enlightening, was that sounds really normal. It was like, wow, actually it is normal. And I'm carrying this and I'm like, one of one instead of one of 8 billion. And many of us are going through similar things. So I do think therapy is important. And I think it's different than I have a best friend. I have hopefully a mom and dad, a close family unit. Like Esther Perel has a quote about relationships that I'll apply here, where she talks about how we want our wife or husband to be really romantic and really comforting and really this and really that. And she says, we want from one person what a whole village used to provide. And I think it's true here. So I do think therapy falls into that separate category of having a therapist can be great. Now, you can also start to over rely on it where you're not having the conversations with the actual people in your lives and things like that. But I do think if we're looking at a spectrum societally, we're definitely more on the side of more people could use it than it's being overprescribed or overused.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that folks are finding they're more lonely these days, but it's more so that it's a new service being offered and people are finding it very helpful.
Well, actually, people are finding themselves more lonely nowadays as well. So the Surgeon General came out with a study on the loneliness epidemic, and they talk about how the effect of loneliness is like smoking 10 packs of cigarettes a day. And whether that's the decrease of organized religion, whether it's the fact that we're living increasingly polarized lives, both online and offline. Kids nowadays probably, you can relate to this probably more than I can. I'm sure your daughter probably spends some time outside with friends, but probably spends some time on the phone or playing video games and things like that. Or maybe she doesn't, but her friends do. And, some of the younger generations are having trouble interacting in the same way that older generations did. I also saw another chart that showed how far we were able to travel from our house. And it was like our grandparents' generation was this far, and our parents was this, and ours was this, and now it's like this. And so people's lives are becoming more limited and in many ways more lonely, more disconnected from other human beings. So yeah, it's that also.
We'll head into kind of your earlier business journey, building a company. But, one thing was it seems like you're approaching it from a B2B perspective in that your clients or customers are companies. Why did you choose to approach it that way?
So February will be 10 years of doing this. So when we started 10 years ago, we were a very different company. We started as a meditation company because meditation was the practice that changed my life. We were doing B2B because I had built and sold a B2B company prior. So that was a logical entry point for us and a pretty efficient use of capital. But I always believed that meditation would be more, if there was a business to be had there, it would be on the consumer side. So we were doing B2B because that was my background, but we were really focusing on consumer. During the pandemic, so October 2020, we shut down consumer to focus on B2B. Because we had never really focused on B2B, we had at that point expanded from meditation into a whole host of other modalities. And as you probably remember from the pandemic, companies were never more concerned about the mental health of their employees than they were at that point. And so it was one of these things where all the signs were pointing towards, well, B2B, you kind of know what you're doing. Consumer, we were still learning. There were a lot of headwinds on consumer. We were competing against much better funded companies. And the market had changed, right? So all of a sudden we said, great, let's put down our swords on the consumer side and spend a lot more time on B2B. And that's when things really took off.
And then from a analytical business perspective, does a company pay by usage? Is there like an overall kind of enterprise package? Is it by minutes? How does it work?
Yes, we have a number of different programs. Most of them are based on the size of the employee base, as opposed to usage or minutes or sessions or anything like that. We are open to doing it a number of ways, but I think that's the best both for the company and for us. For the company, meaning our client, they know how much they're paying. And then we are both totally aligned to let's drive as much engagement as possible. Like as a mission driven company, I want people to have these tools. I want people to get care. And so they know what they're paying and let's work together to drive it versus, hey, we have this really interesting initiative, but if it works, it's going to cost you twice as much money as what you thought you were paying, where it's more variable. And then we'll provide performance guarantees on the downside to say, we're going to hit these marks. And if we don't, we'll pay. We've never had a performance guarantee called into action, so we're good there. But the idea is let's provide every employee with as much support as possible and work together to get them to use it.
The sense that this could become pretty sticky. Say there's like a handful, there's probably a certain percentage of the employees that really want to use the service and then use it consistently. And then on the other side, there's probably some therapists that are really popular that everyone wants to talk to. Are you seeing that that is the case, or is it fairly distributed?
Good question. So in our first version of the business, it was more the former. And in where we are today, it's more the latter. So I'll speak to that. So we have a product called Journey Live, which is a digital platform that has a variety of really robust, diverse, inclusive tools. It's a web app, it's a mobile app. So we have that at a lot of great companies, Walgreens, L'Oreal, et cetera. And then we launched a product 2 years ago called Journey Proactive EAP. So EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program. Every big company has one, and most of them are not really used. So we took all of Journey Live, so everything that we've been doing in terms of great proactive mental health care, and combined it with excellent clinical support, crisis management, work-life care. And so in the former, when we weren't doing therapy, there were these live group coaching classes, and certain teachers were really popular. And so you'd see Jackie or Hector would have these big audiences and people really love them. On the therapy side, we have 75,000 therapists. And what people are looking for is very specific. Like you might say, I'm looking for somebody based in DC who has experience with families and who's a veteran and can see somebody in person, right? Somebody else working next door to you or right by your side might say, I'm a female African-American woman, I'm a manager, and I want somebody who has experience with executives. So in the current iteration of the business, we don't really see that as much, but we did quite a lot in the first version of it.
A friend of mine runs a business that caters also to companies and providing concierge services to employees. Where do you draw the line between what a company should be providing versus what a consumer should seek from an independent provider because like each employee could just go another route. Is it the case that it's like, oh, it's free from my employer, so I'll go that route? And so you could be viewed as, maybe you have an advantage over some of these other independent offerings. How do you view that?
Let me start with the first thing you said, which is employees are expecting more and more from companies than they were in the past. And a lot of that was led by some of the tech companies where they were printing cash, right? A Google, a Meta. And they said, hey, we want to attract and retain the top talent. Well, we need to offer not just, a billiards table or a happy hour, but we want to have on-site barbershops. We want to have great mental health care. And that list continues to expand. In response to Roe v. Wade, a lot of companies added family planning support and things like that. So that line continues to shift as employees are expecting more and as companies realize it's a competitive advantage, or you have to keep up with the Joneses, depending on where you are, right? Because if you're the company that doesn't offer great mental health support, you might say, well, we pay you enough. You can go get it somewhere else. But somebody might say, well, we pay you the same and we care about you.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I'd like to switch gears for a little bit. I know the deal toy business because I used to work in investment banking for many years and I had to order these deal toys. But I'm fascinated because I was like, I know your company. Can you tell us about how you started that whole chain of events? Like you were working at a division, then
Yeah.
bought it out. Yeah, the whole thing would be great.
So I went to NYU and I was at Stern, the undergraduate business school. And when I graduated, most of my friends went into investment banking as an analyst, and which was the thing to do back in 2001. And it wasn't my path. And so I went and did something more entrepreneurial. I went and started working at this company called the Award Group, and the Award Group was owned by two older gentlemen. And I joined to run their nonprofit division. So this helped nonprofits and associations to raise more money from their donors by recognizing and celebrating them, right? By designing and manufacturing awards. So it very much aligned with me from a mission standpoint. While I was doing that, I started getting requests from all my friends from Stern who were, investment banking analysts, and they were saying, hey, can you do these deal toys? And I was like, what's that? Well, it's a gift that an investment bank gives to their clients and their employees when they commemorate a deal. And that gift can take a certain shape or form. It's made out of lucite or crystal, and it has all the different financial details. And of course, in the spirit of investment banking, bigger is better and more elaborate and more creative. And so this was at a time when the markets were really roaring, right? 2001, 2, 3, 4, up to 2007, basically. And I started getting a lot of these requests. And so I just, I was still running the nonprofit division, but this started to grow really quickly. And my friends were at Merrill Lynch and Bank of America and Bear Stearns and Lehman and companies that are no longer there, and Goldman and Morgan Stanley. And it just started to grow really quickly. And so a few years later, I purchased that division in a management buyout from those two older gentlemen. And the reason I say that they're older, the reason it's relevant here is because they just had a different risk profile. Mm-hmm. I was in my mid-20s. I was like, let's go. And they were in their 60s at this point, probably 70s, and saying, hey, we want to conserve cash, right? We want to take money out of the business, not keep pushing it. So I was able to come up with a way to acquire that business. It was October 2007. So peak of the stock market. Nobody knew it at the time. So we had a bunch of good months, and then the market gave out with the big financial crash. We read that very different than our competitors. So our competitors had been around for 30 years or 20 years or a decade. And so they thought, oh, we've seen this before. I hadn't. So I was like, oh, this is existential. We need to cut costs really quickly. And that positioned us well. We ended up consolidating the industry. So we rolled up the second, third, and fourth largest companies in the space, along with a few independents. And then when the market came back, we opened offices in London, Sydney, Hong Kong, Montreal, and Taiwan. And so when I sold it in 2014, we had about a 40% market share globally. So, 4 out of 10 of these deal toys that were made around the world were made by my company.
Incredible. And did you have backing or partnership with private equity?
Not private equity. When I first bought it, I was in my 20s, so I had a little bit of money. So I put some money in. They wanted me to have skin in the game. I was able to get seller financing. Mm-hmm. So those two gentlemen said, look, this business as a standalone business is actually printing cash, but we'll give you some financing. And then I was able to get the manufacturer of the actual units, right, the physical awards, to provide financing through a friend of his. So basically, I was able to get financing. We were too small at that point for private equity.
Excellent. And so were you encountering stress during that time, which then led you to meditation?
Yes to the first, no to the second. So it was kind of like ignorance is bliss. Like when I was building the business, it was stressful. I was working, like I'd come in at 7, I'd work till midnight, but I was also young and I was living in the city with a bunch of friends and I was partying and I was like, it felt like there was a lot of momentum. So that part was good. Then when the financial crisis hit, I had to cut all my expenses, all my costs, all my salary. We had to lay off a bunch of people. That part was really hard. But I didn't know that meditation was a thing. I didn't know therapy. That was not a thing. It was only a few years later when things were going well again, when I moved to Australia to open our office there. So that was around 2010, 11. And I found meditation through a book on Buddhism. It just really spoke to me and it changed my life in really profound ways. I was always sort of searching or seeking for ways. Like I was like, but not to combat stress actually, but more on the, is this all there is to life thing? Is this it? And I wanted to find some kind of deeper meaning, and meditation and Buddhism helped me with both of those. And then with meditation, I was like, well, what if we could, not everyone's going to end up in Australia and serendipitously find this book. My brother works at a hedge fund. My mom's a teacher. What if we could bring it to them in a really simple, approachable, secular, science-based way? Maybe that would really help them. And so that was the impetus for starting the company.
And so the first iteration was meditation, as you were saying. And so was it envisioned that it would actually be somewhat of a learning management system and someone teaching to all the attendees, like how to meditate?
Yeah. So when we started, we were doing things. I mentioned that the B2B channel made sense for us as an entry point. So we were going on site and we were teaching. So our first client was Warby Parker. Our second was Time Warner. And then we would go on site and we would teach meditation at places like Google and Facebook and others. And then we said, wow, there's something really special that happens when people come in a room together to meditate, to connect, going back to the earlier loneliness conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And for thousands of years, meditation was taught in communities, in groups. And at that point, people were learning it with Headspace or Calm. And what you'd often hear when you talk to people is, I tried meditation. I tried Headspace or Calm, and it didn't work. Well, why didn't it work? Oh, my brain, this, that. But also behavior change, habit formation is really hard to do on your own, right? Like, just hard to build new habits. But if you have support and accountability and a community, it keeps you coming back. And so we thought, what if we could take what's happening in corporations, what we're doing in corporations, and do it digitally? And so we raised a bunch of money and we launched this product, Journey Live. When we launched, TechCrunch called it Peloton for meditation. So live group classes, you can interact, you can get support. And that product is one of the two that I mentioned that we still have today, except that it expanded into all of these other subclinical modalities, breathwork, journaling, cognitive behavioral therapy, lots of content based on your identity or lifestyle or life stage. So the idea being you can always be seen. And if meditation is not your thing, that's fine. Meditation is just one of the many practices available. That's how it evolved.
And can you give us a sense for like the scale of the business currently and what's your ultimate like objective with it?
We support over 2 million people. I've been in this for 10 years. I love it. I'm very passionate about it from a mission standpoint. It still feels like there's so many challenges. It's like, I don't know, the Jeff Bezos, like it's always day one kind of thing. It kind of feels like that, sometimes in a good way, but sometimes not. Sometimes in a, like a Sisyphus, like still pushing the rock up the hill. I could do this for another 10 years. I also think we're getting to a place where we become interesting to some of the bigger companies that are also in our space. So while it's not something that we're looking at now or probably within the next year or two, I do think we could potentially get acquired in a handful of years versus going and doing it another 10 years. Although if that was the case, honestly, like it really still invigorates me. And I don't see a world where services like this are not going to be needed, unfortunately.
I'd like to end with 2 final questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Should I go with my wife or my son? I'll go with my wife. My wife has really allowed me to like settle into just being me. She gave me, right when we started dating, like what felt like unconditional, like love and support for just being me and feeling, and I say this to my son a lot, he's only 1, you're perfect just the way you are. Now, she doesn't say that, especially now that we're married. She definitely doesn't say that. But like, it was a feeling of support that I had never really felt in that way before. Yeah, I'll go with her.
That's awesome. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
I support an organization called Partnership with Native Americans. And I actually got to see a documentary the other day that a friend put out called Navajo Nation USA. I don't think it's come out yet. This was a release party here in New York at the Angelica, but they're doing great work. without getting too emotional, I think we could do a lot more to support Indigenous peoples here in the US. And so that's a cause that's near and dear to my heart.
Wonderful. Well, Stephen, that's a good note to end on. Stephen, I appreciate you taking the time. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks, RJ.